After their encounter with the Lich Levosin, Bonnie and Thurnon were unable to get much rest through the rest of the night, especially with that strange little reptilian quasit creature staring and grinning at them. Although they were still tired, Bonnie and Thurnon were nonetheless relieved when the sun rose and it was safe to leave the forest ruins. Both Thurnon and Bonnie were eager to leave their camp and were quick to pack up their supplies. "We better get moving," Thurnon stated. "By my estimates, it will be at least a day or two walk to Valen from here." "You'll get no argument here, but it would have been a lot faster if someone hadn't cut down the bridge," Bonnie retorted sarcastically, as they headed back the way they had came the night before. "Why, indeed it would have been," Thurnon responded. "Perhaps we should have surrendered. Then we would have certainly been there by now already, right there in the Valen dungeon." "Doesn't matter anyhow. What's done is done now," Bonnie stated. "I'd like to get down there, though, and see that ship for myself." Glancing down at the quasit a moment as it hopped alongside them, Thurnon pulled Bonnie over by the arm. Then, leaning close, he whispered, "This is madness," into her ear. "We need to kill that thing and forget all about this crazy deal with the Lich." Then, glancing over at the quasit again, Thurnon noticed its large bat-like ears twitching as it grinned and giggled at him. Then, with a murderous glare, the quasit spoke in a shrill voice. "You should just kill me now, elf. Kill, kill, kill! Ha 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 ha!" It laughed, while it bounced around, pointing a sharp claw at Thurnon. "Maybe Smurl'll kill you instead." The creature continued giggling madly while jumping about, chanting, "Kill, kill, kill!" "Shush!" Bonnie hushed the quasit. "Thurnon, this is our only chance to get away from here and be free. We can have it all," she continued, "just like the old days of the Golden Falcon." "Fine," Thurnon responded. "I'll play along for now, but I still don't see how we can get down that chasm." "Smurl knows the way," the quasit interjected. "Smurl knows a path down the cliff and through the stone to the bottom." Looking at Bonnie, Thurnon said, "I don't trust that thing as far as I could kick it." "Smurl serve the master," the quasit responded. "Smurl show you the way and get the master's phylactery." Then, pointing down the path, "Just a little further this way. You see, Smurl knows," said the sinister little creature. "Let's at least take a look," Bonnie stated. "Surely if it serves Levosin, why would it mislead us?" she assured him. The quasit led them down the path to the edge of the canyon, where the tattered remains of the rope bridge was still dangling from the cliff. They continued to follow Smurl along the edge of the canyon until they reached a spot where a narrow ledge gradually descended along the cliff wall. "Down here," the quasit said excitedly as it scampered down the stone ledge. "This way is nice tunnel through stone to the bottom." Thurnon and Bonnie cautiously followed the quasit down the narrow ledge into the canyon. The ledge was uneven and at times became so narrow they had to walk sideways along it, but eventually they reached a hole in the cliff wall. It was barely large enough for them to crawl through and led to a small dark tunnel. Thurnon and Bonnie climbed through the hole and crawled into the dark tunnel. "Stay close to Smurl," the quasit urged. "Smurl see good in dark tunnels," it stated as it led them down the pitch-black tunnel. After crawling along behind the quasit a while, claustrophobia began to set in. As the winding and twisting dark tunnel descended ever deeper, it seemed to be shrinking narrower and tighter as they crawled along, and at some points they were barely able to squeeze through, until finally they rounded a bend where there was a dim light at the end of the tunnel. Before they reached it, though, the quasit suddenly stopped, and held a single bony, clawed finger up over its grinning, fanged mouth. "Shh," it hushed. "Smurl hears something up ahead." Then, sniffing at the air, "Smells like ogre," it stated. "Smurl, go look." Then the closet's body began twisting and contorting unnaturally. It groaned and moaned quietly as it shrunk down, and after a moment it was completely polymorphed into a toad. Smurl croaked at them, and then hopped away down the dark tunnel towards the light. Bonnie and Thurnan waited patiently while Smurl investigated. A few moments later, Smurl returned, still in toad form. Smurl simply looked at them and croaked again. Then it once more began transforming, and after a few moments of a somewhat gruesome display, Smurl was once more his usual closet self. "Two nasty ogres," Smurl declared, "but are sleeping now. You go kill them," it whispered excitedly. Thurnan sighed and unsheathed his one remaining assassin's dagger. "Be careful," Bonnie whispered, as Thurnan continued towards the light. Without a word, he slowly crawled down the tunnel and into the ogre's den. The tunnel exited into a small cavern. The dimly lit cavern was littered with bones and debris. At the center was a small campfire, still burning, and on either side of the campfire lay two sleeping ogres. The monstrous ogres snored loudly as Thurnan crept through the piles of bones. As he approached, crunch! Thurnan had stepped on and crushed a small skull. One of the ogres stopped snoring. It stirred a moment, and Thurnan froze in his tracks. Then it slowly rolled over and continued to snore. Thurnan breathed a sigh of relief as he closed in on the sleeping ogres. They were humongous, easily 600 or 700 pounds of pure muscle. Thurnan approached the nearest ogre and positioned the point of his dagger directly over its throat, then plunged it deeply into the sleeping ogre's neck. With a loud howl, the ogre instantly reared up, knocking Thurnan over to the ground. The ogre thrashed around a moment with the dagger still lodged in its neck. Blood gushed from the wound. Then, with a gurgling shriek, it tumbled to the ground. The second ogre was immediately awakened, then clambered to his feet and roared with anger. Then it picked up a huge club and lumbered towards Thurnan. Thurnan was too far to retrieve his blade from the dead ogre, so he retreated back through the scattered bones, looking hurriedly for some cover or a weapon. Just as the ogre came into range and was about to swing his club, Thurnan spotted an old shield laying on the ground amidst the bones. Grabbing hold of the shield, Thurnan rolled over and deflected the incoming club. The ogre again swung his huge club at Thurnan. This time, Thurnan raised the shield and charged directly at the ogre. Ducking beneath the swinging club, Thurnan slammed the shield first into the ogre's legs with all his might. The ogre roared, but kicked Thurnan, splitting the shield in two and sending him skidding across the cavern. With a painful thud, Thurnan slid directly into a large stalagmite. By the time he regained his senses, the ogre was already upon him, about to smash him with his club. But Thurnan rolled away again, barely avoiding the incoming club, which instead smashed through the stalagmites. Then, right when Thurnan landed, his hand felt something. Looking down, Thurnan saw an old short sword on the ground, partially covered in dirt. Thurnan waited until the ogre again neared him and raised his club. Then Thurnan quickly lifted the sword from the ground, swinging it around and spraying the dirt directly into the ogre's face and eyes. The ogre reared back and dropped its club as it tried to rub the dirt from its eyes. Thurnan seized the moment and leapt forward, thrusting his short sword directly into the ogre's chest. The ogre stumbled back, roaring and shrieking in agony. Then it stopped, grasped the embedded sword, and pulled it free. Blood sprayed from the wound, and the ogre howled in pain, then dropped to its knees. As blood poured forth from its chest, the ogre wobbled a moment before falling flat on its face. Just as it hit the ground, Thurnin noticed a crossbow bolt stuck in the back of its head. Then, looking up, there, standing in the distance, wielding a crossbow, was Bonnie. "You were taken forever," Bonnie said, with a grin, "so I came to see what the holdup was." "Thanks," Thurnin stated. "I thought I was done for." "We should search this cavern for anything useful," he suggested. They looked around, but found little else of use in the ogre's den. They did, however, manage to fashion some torches from the debris. Meanwhile, the little Quasit bounced around, giggling with delight at the scene, even splashing around in the blood and smearing it gleefully over his reptilian body as it oozed from the dead ogres. "Smurl likes," it said with a giggle. "Smurl hope you kill more for me." "Are you done?" Thurnin asked, glaring at the Smurl. The Quasit hissed at him, then grinned that sinister razor-fanged grin. "Fine, Smurl take you to the ship," it said, as it headed across the cavern to another tunnel. Thurnin and Bonnie followed Smurl into the tunnel. This tunnel was considerably larger than the others, and judging from the trails of blood smears on the floor, it was probably used by the ogres to bring some victims to their den. After a short distance, the tunnel exited to a small cave at the bottom of the canyon. After only a few hours in the caverns, Bonnie and Thurnin were blinded by the sunlight as they emerged from the cave. There was very little vegetation in the valley. It was mostly rock and sandy terrain, with a small river running along the center. "This way, follow Smurl," the Quasit exclaimed. "We're almost there." Bonnie and Thurnin followed the Quasit a little further upstream until they reached a huge waterfall. "Right there," Bonnie said excitedly. "The Lich said it was behind the waterfall." "You see?" Smurl said, glaring at Thurnin. "Smurl help you help the master." "Let's just take it slow," Thurnin suggested. "We don't know what else could be behind that waterfall." They proceeded along the riverside until they approached the waterfall, but looking behind it, it didn't appear to be any sort of cave or entrance. "There's nothing here," Thurnin stated, pointing his blade at the Quasit, but the Quasit simply grinned its murderous grin and pointed upwards. "Master is hidden in her ship," Smurl stated. "Over the rocks and into the cave. Come, Smurl showed you." Thurnin sighed with frustration, then looked at Bonnie. "We came all this way," she stated. "What's a few rocks to stand in our way now?" Shaking his head, Thurnin huffed and started climbing up the rock face beside the waterfall. The Quasit scampered up the cliff ahead of them, showing them the best places to grasp and climb. After climbing approximately 30 feet or so, they reached a ledge which led behind the waterfall. Somehow, the Quasit easily scurried along the ledge and disappeared behind the waterfall. But Thurnin and Bonnie, however, had to move much more carefully to avoid slipping off the wet, narrow stone ledge. They nonetheless slowly made their way behind the waterfall. In here, Smurl said as it waved from inside a small opening between the boulders. Thurnin and Bonnie squeezed through the opening and emerged into a huge, misty cavern. The massive cavern was mostly filled with water, and right in the center, surrounded by a thin fog, a huge galleon floated silently in the water. "It's incredible," Bonnie gasped. It's bigger than the Golden Falcon.
Smurl said Smurl lead you to ship. You leave Smurl now,
the Quasit asked, glaring at Thurnan. You may have held up your end of the bargain so far, Thurnan responded, but I'll still be watching your every move. He paused a moment, shifting his gaze back to the ship. There's still something about this place that makes me feel uneasy.
Come this way,
the Quasit said as it waved them along a path around the edge of the underground pond. Bonnie and Thurnan followed Smurl along the path to a small beach where they found a small rowboat on the shore. Well, since we're here, let's take a look, Bonnie said, as she began dragging the rowboat towards the water. Thurnan tossed his sword into the boat and proceeded to help Bonnie launch the dinghy. Once afloat, the trio climbed into the rowboat and slowly rowed out to the galleon. As they neared the boat, they could see the ship was essentially a massive floating fortress with 4 towering masts. It had armor plating on the outside of its upper decks, 2 rows of 8 cannons on both port and starboard sides, as well as 6 cannons on bow and stern. Over there, Bonnie pointed at a knotted rope hanging from the upper deck. They rowed the little boat alongside the ship and secured the rowboat by tying it to the bottom of the hanging rope. Then, one by one, they ascended the knotted rope until they reached the galleon's upper deck. As they climbed aboard the galleon's upper deck, they stood for a moment in awe. The ship appeared to be completely empty. Looking around, "Isn't it a marvelous ship?" Bonnie said enthusiastically. "Indeed, it is impressive," Thurnan responded. "But I suggest we stay on guard. I can't help but feel like we're not alone here." Thurnan ascended the stairs to the raised quarterdeck and scanned the surrounding cavern. He couldn't help but wonder how they got this ship in here. Then he noticed the top half of a familiar gated drainage outlet pipe protruding from the water at the far end of the cavern. "Down here!" Bonnie's voice called out to him from below. "I'm heading below deck a moment," she stated. "Wait," Thurnan shouted back. "Maybe we best stay together," he suggested as he hurried down the stairs after her. "You worry too much," Bonnie said. "This ship is as good as mine now, so I'm just inspecting the quality of my payment." They descended the stairs into the cabins. Below deck, the first cabin was the captain's cabin. It was a well-decorated room with finely crafted furnishings, a luxurious bed, and complete with a heating stove. But what caught Bonnie's eye was the fancy leather scabbard laying on the center of the bed, containing a large curved saber with a fancy basket-style hilt. Bonnie smiled as she picked up the sword and unsheathed the blade. The blade's finish was unmistakably crafted from mithril and looked sharp as a razor. Bonnie flourished the sword a moment, swooshing it about, slicing the air, before sliding it back into the sheath and leaning it up against the nightstand. "You know, we could spend the night here and worry about getting into Valen tomorrow," Bonnie suggested. "There's even a nice little stove here to keep us warm." "It has been a long day," Thurnan replied, "and it would be nice to rest without having to worry about assassins or liches." Then, looking down at Smurl, "or Quasits." The Quasit simply grinned at him and giggled. "Ahem," Bonnie cleared her throat while opening the door. "Out," she demanded with a serious tone.
Smurl find nice cabin to rest. Smurl find you in morning."
Bonnie nodded and softly whispered, "Thank you," as Smurl reluctantly and slowly left the cabin's quarters. Bonnie then closed the door, kicked off her boots, and launched herself into the big plush bed, bouncing for a moment before stretching out, then rolling over and looking at Thurnan.
It's a bit chilly in here. Why don't you start a fire for us? She suggested.
As Thurnan took some wood from a small pile beside the stove, he said, "When I was up on the quarterdeck, I noticed one of those city drainage outlets in the far end of this cavern." As he lit the fire in the wood stove, he continued, "It's partially submerged, but I suspect it should lead up to the main canals and directly back into Valen."
That's perfect, Bonnie responded. By this time tomorrow night, we'll be back here and sailing out to sea.
"Well, I have to wonder about that," Thurnan said skeptically. "How exactly are we going to get this ship out of here and out to open waters?"
Surely Levosin has something up her sleeve, Bonnie responded. She got it in here somehow. And what goes in must come out.
"That should do," Thurnan said, closing the metal door to the wood stove.
It's starting to warm up in here already, Bonnie stated,
as she removed her outer clothes and slid under the blankets. Thurnan did the same and slid into the bed beside her.